Here we are yet again, another video at the line. I'm still at Starfleet headquarters. I've given up trying to figure out how to change the video. I like it. I'm staying at Starfleet headquarters. The only thing, Jen, that my the viewers are missing right now is that over my pencil disappears into the virtual background. Over my shoulder is I've restarted my counter. Do you remember the handwritten counter I had at the very beginning of the pandemic, where I was counting the days?
No, I don't.
So it started as a joke at the National Post. When the first lockdown began in Ontario, it was by coincidence. We were just getting back from a trip in the United States. So we had to do a 14-day isolation anyway, because we had just returned from out of the country. And I put up on my little whiteboard behind me, which people can't see because instead they're seeing the Golden Gate Bridge and my Starfleet fleet formation chart. I had a little whiteboard and I just put on it day 1 and then day 2. And it was a 14-day quarantine, and it got up to like 200 days because by the time my quarantine ended, the lockdown had begun. So I've restarted that, and I'm counting the days my kids are out of school. As of right now, it's day 9. They are scheduled to return on Monday. I live in Ontario, land of premier flip-flop. I have no confidence my kids will actually be in a classroom on Monday. That's the plan, but I don't have that confidence.
You can cease to be jealous of me. Oh, hello. You can cease to be jealous of me. Teenage years are coming at me fast here, aren't they? Yeah. Well, you can cease to be jealous of me because my kid is actually out with, apparently both a kid in his class and a staff member have been caught with likely Omicron. So the entire class has likely been exposed to Omicron, and Jamie's out with a cough. So he's on a 10-day quarantine or a 10-day isolation. We're all fine. He had a day's worth of cough and he's just fine. And, you know, I felt a little sick yesterday, but I'm fine today. So probably not a big deal. He's half vaccinated, so it's all good. But
he's gonna get Omicron. Shot?
Yeah, he's had the 1 shot, but he didn't get the 2nd shot in time. So
there you go. Okay, well, I'm sorry. Like, this is just going to be the hassle everybody has.
This is just going to be the hassle everybody's got to go through over the next couple of weeks, and that's what it is.
Well, we talked about it in the video last week. I had a head cold last week, and then that turned into a cough that was annoying for a day or 2. And sometime last weekend, I kind of was like, hey, should I take some Dayquil or some NyQuil or something? And I was like, no, I'm going to try going a day without it. And it was fine. And then the next day was better. And by Tuesday, Wednesday this week, I felt 100% normal again. I'm never going to know if I had Omicron or if I just picked up a seasonal cold. The testing situation is such that I'm never going to know. I suppose I could take an antigen test. I just don't care that much. Like, whatever I had I would say for 2. So I had it overall, I experienced some range of symptoms for 6 days, maybe 7. I would say 2 of them were genuinely miserable. 1 of them sort of sucked, and the rest were either the first day where I kind of felt starting to get something, and then kind of 3 days of coming off the slope. I don't know what I had. And
that's
right
also
now,
kind of interesting because I mean, I'm presuming because of the timing and everything that it almost certainly was Omicron.
But what's interesting is exactly Omicron-ish.
Yeah, and not only that, but what I find very interesting is this is the time frame of when I would expect something to hit Ontario versus when to hit Calgary. I mean, Calgary's always going to be a week or 2 behind Ontario on a natural wave curve just because of our relative isolation. Like, if you look at pandemic simulations, Calgary's always one of the last to get hit. So because it's so remote. But like, it's just interesting to me that you got it, and then like almost exactly to the day when I would expect it to hit Calgary en masse, you know, my kid got exposed to it. So it's okay.
Yeah, no, and it's just weird. After 2 years of living under this pandemic, I'm at like we're now at the point I'm triply vaccinated. I had my booster a few weeks before I ended up getting this head cold. It's just amazing for me to think in 2 years we got to the point where I'm like, well, maybe I have it, maybe I don't. My symptoms are so mild, I'm going to stay home, eat soup, and keep working. I didn't miss a moment of work.
Yep.
So I don't know. And again, it's very possible that I just had a typical Canadian winter cold. I'm never going to know.
It just statistically speaking, mathematically speaking, I think that the higher odds are Omicron just by virtue of I got Omicron-like symptoms at exactly the time that Omicron is sweeping through the.
Speaking of Omicron, a lot of what we have to talk about today is Omicron related. Not everything on our list today is Omicron related. We're not even going to talk about the Queen, but just for historians out there, like an hour before we started this, the Queen totally threw Andrew under the bus. So that's just for historians, but we're not going to talk about that. We don't really have anything particular to say. We have a ton of different angles on Omicron. I want to start with this one, Jen. You and I have both been picking around the edges of columns, so we're not going to get fully into this because you have something that you're working on that you're going to say about this. There's a column I'm struggling to write, and I don't normally struggle to write columns. Normally, I sit down, type very quickly, and I'm done. I'm really struggling to write this one, and I think it's one of those issues where it makes sense in my head but not on the page. So I'm going to keep plucking away at this. But in different ways, we're both thinking about the psychology of this moment. Omicron is, and I hope, a completely factual, neutral statement. Omicron as a virus poses a different challenge. We'll leave it as neutrally as that. I'm not saying, like, I'm not getting to any details here. And I think for a lot of reasons, very understandable ones, I think it is hard for a lot of people, and I would include policymakers in this, to pivot. And I think having spent 2 years dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic in one framework, it is hard psychologically for us to go, it's a different threat now. And I'm not downplaying the threat, so people shouldn't go, oh, Gurney's like a denier. No, it's not about that. Omicron poses very real structural threats to our way of life, and we're actually going to talk about one of them in particular in a few minutes. But it is a wildly different challenge than the original waves of COVID. We had some similarities. It's still the same virus. It still can overwhelm the healthcare system. Like that's it. But one of the things that I was talking about with some people earlier in the week is the idea of how do you combat something, right? Like when we were dealing with something that was spreading with an R factor of like 1.5, if you can cut that by 0.5, you've stabilized the epidemic. And if you can cut that by 0.6, you've actually put it on a downslope. And what we were doing at a societal scale was enough to put like a half point knock onto the R factor of the earlier waves. When you're dealing with something that has been moving through Ontario, this is an old number now. It's probably, we can probably update this, but the one I was using for a few weeks was of an R factor of 4. Earlier lockdowns, society-wide shutdowns knocked like 1 point, not even off of that. Taking an epidemic that is spreading at an R of 4 to an R of 3, it doesn't actually matter here. And I think, and I don't say this to be defeatist, but I do think, and we've talked about this in earlier videos, and I don't know why this column is proving so hard to write for me, but I think it's a psychology issue. I think right here in our gray matter, people for a couple of reasons are struggling to adapt for this. I think one of the reasons is familiarity. We've been doing this for 2 years. It's hard to do something else. I think the other reason is something that you and I have talked about, and I know you're going to be talking about this in your column. I think people are struggling to accept the fact that they are going to be exposed to this. And I've seen some really interesting pushback from very smart people going, the narrative of everybody's going to get it, everybody's going to get Omicron is wrong, it's harmful. I don't think it is. And and the reason is, up until 3 months ago, even a month ago, every couple of weeks, my kid's school would send a notice home going, hey, we've had a COVID case, and the following class, they never identified the student, but the following class has been dismissed, or a series of classes has been dismissed. And then the parents would all try to like epidemiologically figure out why, who was it, who was going to be in those classrooms. In Ontario right now, the testing system is collapsed. You cannot have a test. Rapid tests are incredibly scarce. Even if you can find one, and even if you test positive, that's not centrally tracked anywhere. I no longer have the ability to have any idea who has Omicron around me right now. Omicron is so mild for some people, we'll talk about that in a minute, that people are not going to know that they have it here. I no longer have any macro level defenses against this thing. No one's going to tell me if I've been exposed to it. We can't anymore. We can't contact trace or test.
And this will go back to what I'm going to make, this point that I'm going to make in my columns, that we have been so overly reliant on fear and panic-based communications in order to coerce positive behavior, that a significant part of the population has a disproportionately fearful response to catching COVID. They think that I catch COVID, it's going to be a serious illness, I'm going to be intubated, or I'm going to have long-term neurological damage and blah, 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 blah. And as a result, the idea that we're now pivoting to a reality, which is like, we actually can't contain this and you're all going to get exposed, is like, wait a minute. You mean you're going to like, you were making governmental decisions that will permanently damage me? Like, that's the response. And the truth is that's not quite right. That the government can't really do much about this, firstly. And secondly, the fear and panic-based communication was always counterproductive in terms of communicating risk in a way that would allow people to make common sense decisions in terms of managing that risk. So we've kind of fucked ourselves.
Well, you know what? I mean, I said to you this before we started rolling. Here's the weekly Matt military illusion. This is what I'm known for. We are the old saying, right? The generals always fight the last war. We are fighting the Delta war against Omicron, and it's not going to work because the tools we use to fight Delta, which would include aggressive testing, isolation of cases, and dismissals in the school sector, particularly dismissals of entire cohorts or workforces, are not effective against Omicron. And
or we should say it's not that they're not effective; it's that
it's impossible.
The benefits that you will accrue in reduction of transmission through these widespread high-cost measures are marginal.
I'm more cynical than you. It's not about marginal benefits. It's about impossibility. We cannot test for this at the scale necessary. The contact tracing system will not function at the scale necessary. And if we actually put everybody into isolation who's a reasonable contact, we would collapse society. We're already seeing like this is, and I think like, and I do think, and I'm not blaming anyone. This is not a judgmental statement. I understand the psychological challenge people are having in having fought 3 or 4 waves of this thing already by using a testing based first system that then results in contact tracing, that then results in isolation. We can actually have a reasonable prospect of keeping this thing at bay. We will know where it is. We will know where it isn't. We don't, and we are not going to get that back. And you cannot test at scale for this thing. And I have savaged our governments for performance failures, and I could tell you 15 things the Ontario government has done wrong in the last month. I don't think they could have stopped this.
Realistically. Not really. I mean, I look at jurisdictions. Please show me a jurisdiction that's managed to curb Omicron. Show me one. I'll wait. It's just hockey sticks across the board, and that's just what it is. This is the equivalent of blaming the government because the hurricane hit the side of the seaboard. You can blame the government for failing to invest in infrastructure in the long term. You can blame the government for not having insufficient emergency preparedness, and you can blame government for how we manage the cleanup. But fundamentally, the hurricane's going to hit. You can't blame the government for the fact that the hurricane hit.
You know what? Yes. I find it really interesting how a lot of people are struggling to understand that. And that is the exact breakdown of responsibility that I've been trying to impress on people. And most of my pandemic writing, some of it's at the national level, most of it's on the provincial level. Almost everything I've been saying has been, if you want to fault Ford for not having done this soon enough, or having done this too late, I'm all on board with those things, because there are things that we could have done that wouldn't have stopped Omicron, but still would have been worth doing on their own merits that we didn't do. Sure. Hang them out to dry as far as I'm concerned. Go for it. Like I'm not bothered by that at all. But don't trick yourself into thinking that even if we had done all of those things right, that it would have stopped Omicron. It would have made it easier to mitigate Omicron, and that's not nothing. But I still
think that the mitigation would have been minor and like we're hit, as I said, people need to understand diminishing returns. We've hit the diminishing returns curve on this one. I know. I'm trying. Diminishing returns is a really important concept because it hits in almost every aspect of life, from economics to environmental mitigation to like everything that we can do. There is a point, like you have to do something up until the point when doing something becomes more costly than what that doing something will prevent or mitigate. And we have hit diminishing returns.
I
Great,
agree.
you want ventilation in schools? Super, awesome. Guess what? Everyone's going to get Omicron. Like there's nothing. This is the hurricane hitting the seaboard.
Yeah, I think people have a very negative reaction to the statement everyone's going to get Omicron. Maybe not everyone will, but everyone will be exposed to it and they won't know it.
Yeah, I'm being, you're right. That is the technically correct thing to say.
It's,
we can't say that everybody's going to get sick from Omicron, but everyone's going to get, mathematically speaking, everyone's going to be exposed to it.
I want to make a comparison before we move on. That's going to be wildly off topic, but I think you'll understand what I mean by this. And this is a very Matt comparison. Would you like to hear me compare pandemic response to the long gun registry?
Yeah, absolutely.
I've written about the
Everything
long gun.
Can be compared to the long gun registry. Don't be silly.
I've written about the long gun registry and Canadian gun control a lot over the years, as you well know. And I've talked to a lot of cops about this. I've talked to chiefs. I've talked to rank and file guys. One of the theoretical benefits of the long gun registry is that when an officer pulls up to a house because they've gotten a call for any reason, a domestic, a window's been broken and a neighbor noticed it, like any reason an officer rolls up to a house, they punch the address into their computer, and in theory it would come up firearms in house, and the officer therefore would in theory approach the situation differently. Like armed with that information, it would inform their response. The problem with every cop I've ever talked to about this is that the long gun registry was so notoriously unreliable that the absence of a warning was in no way meaningful. So you roll up to a house and you punch in the address and it does not warn you firearms there. The responsible Canadian police officer does not go, and therefore I shall saunter merrily up to the door. The system was so inaccurate and it had so many errors in it, and compliance was believed to be so low. Every officer approached every house on the assumption that there were firearms in it, which might actually explain some of the nasty incidents we've seen with our police over the years. But I think that's where I would make the Omicron comparison. The testing system has collapsed. The contact tracing system has collapsed. No member of the public will have any certainty about where the virus is and is not. And we must all assume that it is around. And I don't say that to inspire panic or defeat. That's a reason to get your vaccine, to get your booster shot, to get your kids vaccinated, and to get back to living. Because unlike those earlier waves, there is no reasonable prospect that something like Omicron will be spotted in a real-time, meaningfully helpful way. You're just never going to know.
And when we say get back to living, we don't necessarily mean like be stupid or be reckless. I mean, we get back to living in a common sense way. I mean, I had this conversation on Twitter the other day, and I was like, well, getting back to living, I'm a downhill skier and I can't do this if the hospitals are filled up. And I'm like, yeah, in Alberta, dude, because there are 64 people in hospital right now. If you break your neck skiing, you are going to get treated. We are not in the place where we were at the height of the Delta collapse. So it's not unreasonable for you to engage in a very low risk outdoor activity like skiing right now. Now, in 3 weeks, if the hospitals are packed, then that wouldn't be a common sense thing to do. Totally different conversation. But right now, get to Nikiska. It's a beautiful time right now. Enjoy your life. Don't hole up in your home because it's not going to make a difference in the long run. But don't do stupid things. Like there's always a really important line, and you just got to trust people to be, maybe don't go into a giant rave of, sweaty meth heads and, you know what I mean? But hey, you should not feel as if you should have to lock yourselves up in your home and make yourself more miserable than you need be. Because that's not realistic given our vaccination rate, given our therapeutics, given everything that we know about this particular risk. Panic is not effective or warranted. And also I would say, like, your common sense personal assessment is going to change depending on your current situation.
Yep.
If you're someone who's deeply immunocompromised, I have many friends and family who are deeply immunocompromised, they are going to hole up in their home. They are going to hope that they don't get it. They are dealing with a totally different risk assessment protocol than the rest of us are, than I am and that you are. Totally fine. I completely understand that. Yes, that's a common sense thing to do. But that's just where we're at.
Also on the Omicron front, we got a bunch of things to move down here. I wanted to mention to you, I was looking at my notes. This is my interpretation. Like I'm telling you what I think. Mileage may vary on this one. I've been intrigued by increasing pushback against the descriptor mild. when we describe Omicron. Now, what we mean by that, let's be clinical about this. Repeated surveys all over the world, including now in Canada, Canadian jurisdictions using real-time data, are showing that Omicron is producing across the board less severe outcomes. Fewer people are requiring hospitalization, fewer people are requiring ICU care, fewer people are dying. The numbers vary. It seems to be, I guess we could say, between 25 and 50% more mild. And I've just been fascinated by what I see as increasing pushback against the use of the term mild. I understand and respect the core argument of the pushback that if you and I, the Canadian media, the international media collectively go around going mild, 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 it's going to mislead people. It's going to give them a false sense of security. It could encourage reckless behavior. Okay. Yep. I hear you. That's a respectable argument. But I also, what I've been asking some of my colleagues who have been talking about this is, do we not report on the fact that it's more mild? Like if a scientific report comes out that shows, again, just hypothetically, that hospital admissions are down 25% and ICU admissions are down 50%. In terms of cases, like a percentage of cases, right? Because cases are way up. So we're kind of making it up on volume, and we're surging the hospitals in Ontario. But on like a per 1,000 cases, rates of hospitalization and ICU use are down. Does anyone actually mean to suggest that the responsible thing to do as journalists is to not report that?
Yes, and this to me is an important point, because it goes to something about the journalistic mandate that I don't agree with you. I don't understand, and I don't respect that argument. Trying to basically mislead people about the severity of an illness in the hopes of manipulating their behavior en masse, even if it's well-intentioned, is fundamentally paternalistic and manipulative. And it means that you are no longer serving a journalistic mandate, and you are instead serving the goals of basically public health communications officers, regardless of whether or not that's sane. That's not our goddamn job. And if you do that and continue, that right there is at the core of a lot of the problems we've been having in newsrooms in the last couple of years. The idea that our job as journalists isn't to inform people, but rather to use our platforms to make people believe and do the right things. That's not our job. All right. And fundamentally, I think it doesn't actually work, because all it actually does in the long run is reduce trust in your institution.
Yeah. And then some guy with a blog declares himself the self-appointed expert of the real hospitalization data, and he gets 100,000 followers on Twitter, and he does the job for us.
Yes, and fundamentally he's correct, and that's why he wins. You are just shooting a bullet right in your own head if that is your idea of what appropriate responsible journalism is. Your job is to report the fucking news.
I agree with you.
That's your job.
No, I agree with you. And that's why I brought this up. But let me say one thing. There is a difference between managing the news and choosing your words carefully.
100%. Yes.
The problem,
I don't think that you should be irresponsible.
Yeah. The problem is I have yet to hear someone explain to me what the meaningful difference is in this case. So people go, oh, well, we have to be very careful about describing it as mild. It's like, okay, well, what should we describe it as?
This is also where I'm going to get beefy here. You're so cautious about using words like mild, because that might be irresponsible, and yet there's no commensurate conversation about using language and information in ways that will scare the fuck out of people. Mm-hmm. That's considered morally acceptable, even when it leads to outcomes like and measures that are actually measurably harmful, like closing schools, because panicking the hell out of people, that's considered a moral good. And questions of journalistic responsibility don't come into that, even when panicking the hell out of people is going to lead to long-term loss of trust, hysteria, and potentially even helping to foment psychosomatic illness, because you've scared people so badly, and mental health issues. But no, that's fine, and we don't have journalistic responsibility conversations about that. But no, the word mild, that's the thing you're gonna pick on. I find this to be gross, and I don't think that this is in alignment with any concept of journalism that is appropriate to me.
The other argument, and again, broadly agreeing with you there, the other thing I said to people when I was having this conversation is that there is something immoral about having good news and withholding it, because I agree with my colleagues in the media who say that we need to responsibly communicate the news about mild, that we don't want to put it into people's head that it does not produce negative health outcomes, that it's a nothing burger in the parlance, right? We have to be responsible. And what I said to my colleagues
was, they applied that responsibility to like scaring the fuck out of people. Like that would also be great.
What I said was that all of the concerns about the use of the term mild impose on us a duty of responsibility. It does not impose on us a duty of silence. It does not impose on us an obligation to withhold. Because I also said Omicron is everywhere. It is everywhere. We have no idea where it's popping up. There are going to be people in the coming weeks who are immunocompromised, who are organ transplant recipients. They're on chemotherapy, they're elderly, and they have done everything they can. They have been triply vaccinated. They have worn a mask every time they go grocery shopping, and they're going to find out that they have been exposed to it. And it would be fucking outrageous if they were denied whatever solace they might get from knowing that this is, relatively speaking, more mild than Delta. We do not have the right to withhold even highly I'm trying to say caveated, is that even a word? Highly conditional good news is still news that needs to be shared here. I 100% agree that we have a responsibility to communicate complicated matters in an accessible and socially responsible way. But when there is good news, you don't share it because you're worried that people are going to do dumb stuff. That's going beyond what our mandate is. And as you said so eloquently, that's not journalism, that's communications. If you want to be a public health communicator, and I don't know if you saw Ontario's performance yesterday, we could use one.
Go make more money and go work for public health. Go engaged in basically forms of group manipulation and psyops in order to try and manipulate mass behavior. If that is how you are so inclined. We don't need you in the journalistic corps if that is your fundamental approach to journalism. Sorry, I don't go do that if that's what you think is the good thing to do.
About hospitalization breakdowns, or do we
this I think is a relatively small point, but
you have a companion.
This is my clone. This is my male clone, my tiny 5-year-old male clone, and it's kind of look at a cute.
Hey buddy.
Hey.
Oh, he can't hear me, can he? You got okay, you got earbuds.
That's okay. Okay, son. Can I say I love you? Can you say I love me? I love you. No. Okay, so this is something. So Jason Kenney did a breakdown of hospitalization rates on a Facebook Live. This was interesting because what's neat here is that he noted that essentially our hospitalization rates are actually pretty not going through the roof. Like Ontario, we're noticing more hospitalizations, way fewer comparably to the previous waves, with way fewer ICUs. The other thing that's noticing is that most of the hospitalization in ICUs still appear to be Delta, not Omicron. So I think something like 11 of our 64 ICUs, I'll double check this, were actually Omicron. So Omicron is not only, again, mild compared to Delta, but it's wildly disproportionately more mild than Delta, considering the vast majority of our record-setting cases are Omicron. So it puts a little bit of that into perspective. But the reason why I think it might be worthwhile doing just a little blurb sort of summarizing what was said there is I'd like to do a quick comparison of Alberta versus Ontario. And I like to keep an eye on that because one of the big questions that you and I have had is whether or not the previous Delta wave in Alberta has, in a sense, sort of protected us from a really catastrophic Omicron wave. You guys managed to keep your Delta wave completely under control. We did not. Somewhat under control. Yeah. We did not. Delta ran rampant here, and we got into almost triage territory as a result of that. I'm wondering if we will see any effects in the next few weeks. So I would like to do just a little blurb, keeping an eye on that, just to see if whether or not that Delta wave maybe protected us or didn't protect us. Like that would be interesting. Hello, nice teeth, bud.
Yeah, no, he's starting to look like my son in terms of the hockey player. All the teeth are missing.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. If you want to do that, I mean, in Ontario, the situation is pretty simple. Our hospitalizations overall have never been this high. Our ICU capacity, which is still going up, so I'm not declaring victory prematurely, has not gone up as high. We redlined the system and put it right into a state of near collapse at 900 COVID patients in ICU. I've been told unofficially, due to burnout and exhaustion, the system's capacity is probably about 10 to 20% lower than that this time.
Okay.
So we would redline the system, just ballpark this at about 750 patients. And that's
Sure.
Don't hold me that, folks. That's me.
No, we're napkin mathing here.
And
And what's how many ICU patients are you at?
As of this morning, 500. So that's the concern is that number is soaring higher really fast. It is interesting to note, though, and I want to qualify this for anyone who may eventually choose to hang me with this. Every leading indicator metric in Ontario right now is improving, and it's only started to do so in the last couple of days. Testing positives, case positives, coming down now. Okay, the cynic goes, well, testing's very limited now and it's rationed, so that's not a meaningful metric. I agree. The other metric that's coming down, test positivity, you can again write that off and you can go, yeah, well, testing is very limited. And I go, yep, fair enough. I agree with you.
Except even in a ration testing regime, if cases were still going up in the real world, we would expect to see test positivity going up even higher as opposed to coming down.
I don't know how we could reasonably interpret the data given the chaos in Ontario's testing.
Sure, fair enough.
So we discount that, but then we look at the fact that hospital admissions are still soaring, but they've started to slow very subtly. It could be a data blip. Like maybe this doesn't hold a week. As you can tell, I'm putting in all these caveats. The last interesting indicator, wastewater in Ottawa, which is not only tracked, but Ottawa has its act together sufficiently to give reasonably real-time data on that. It's come down too. So,
and also this would be consistent with what we've seen in every other jurisdiction.
Yep.
You see radical increases and then just rapid collapse as the illness burns itself out very rapidly. So,
Omicron has been burning in Ontario for about a month. And
so this is about the time we would start to see the collapse. So even these relatively small positive early indicators are things that I wouldn't totally discount.
No, I don't totally discount them either. I'm now officially paying attention to all of them, but I draw no conclusion yet beyond interesting. One question I have, and I don't know, we're not going to be able to answer this. This is something I'm going to have to go try to figure out. With something as infectious as Omicron, where will the R value stabilize?
It would still have to stabilize it sort of below.
Well, we would hope it would. Like, I mean, I'm just wondering, without aggressive interventions, what is sort of the natural level of R for Omicron going to be in a Canadian environment? I don't know.
I would be more. I'd be less concerned with Omicron and more concerned with the future variants, right? I mean, we are all fully expecting this to move to an endemic phase at some point.
Eventually,
at which point there will be a circulating strain of COVID in the same way there are circulating strains of flus and colds. Yep. It will just fade into the background of seasonal illness, right?
Time. I'm just genuinely curious. I got to go ask one of my epidemiology nerds what plus-sized infectivity will mean for stabilization point for a virus in a population. I don't know, and I'm curious to find out. So
yeah, that'd be an interesting question to ask. So anyway, how do you want to break this down? So
we do have one more thing to mention.
Sorry.
Just briefly, you wanted to mention this. We've gabbed enough. You had an interesting thought about Tara Henley, and the discourse has continued.
Right.
We don't really have anything more to say about her. Like, God bless her. Have fun, Tara.
And also, she's going to be judged now on the content of the work she produces. Like that's now she has to decide to figure out if she can build an audience. So that's her call.
You had an interesting thought though about kind of the continued aggressive targeting in some spaces of Tara Henley.
On Twitter, National Observer's come out with a piece, the Gawker stuff. It's just like all of the anti-Tara Henley stuff has been so long standing now and so disproportionate they're still
The
going
woman
on
wrote a
about it.
Substack essay, and we're still
Like,
talking about it 2 weeks
we're
later.
still talking about it 3 weeks later. I mean, this is getting a little nuts, isn't it? And I kind of wonder if part of the disproportionality of the anti-Tara Henley response is rooted in the fact that people are sensing that the Twitter cancel culture brigade is losing its power. They haven't canceled her.
You know what's interesting? Maybe, I don't know, and I confess I have paid less attention to this than you have. I think you were more interested because you had spoken to her once before all this.
She interviewed me for her Globe piece before she quit.
I don't care that much about this, but I do find it interesting. Couple of things I would say. First of all, maybe you're right. Maybe this is exactly what it is. You and I have always been very clear that most of these internal newsrooms fights, or more broadly, most of these fights in media, are about power, influence, who will drive the agenda. There has been in some cases,
and who gets to set the institutional values.
Yes.
Who gets to decide what the institutional values are going to be.
And something you and I have spoken about before publicly and just between us, is that newsroom leadership, for a lot of reasons, has abdicated some of its roles, or it has just had the reins seized from it. So some of the power to dictate norms in Canadian media now does not exist in the hierarchy of traditional newsrooms. It exists in cyberspace. It exists on Slack channels, group chats, and outright on Twitter.
Yep.
One of the things we have always known would happen eventually was that the pendulum would swing. That like culture wars are never entirely solar directional, right? They go back and forth. There's a couple of, you could be right. There are a couple of other things that could explain what you're seeing, though. One of them could just be everyone being grumpy. Like maybe Tara came out with her piece and a bunch of pissed off journalists who wish they were not dealing with
fatigued and
and
also there were some shots that she took there in the pandemic where she's like, oh, anybody who works at the CBC doesn't have journalistic integrity. If I worked at the CBC, that would piss me off.
No, because most CBC journalists are good. Like,
yeah, totally. So I can understand why people put it this way. I think that, if that essay had been edited a little bit more carefully, it would be able to hold up a lot more powerfully than it does. Which is not to say that I think that her overall observations about self-censorship or the disproportionate effect of Twitter discourse on newsroom ethics is necessarily wrong.
No, I think it's broadly right. I told you this before, and I have no hesitation saying this on the record. I don't think Tara knew what she was getting into. Like, I think with all respect to her, and I think she was a bit naive about what being a combatant in the culture wars is like. I have fought culture war battles. I don't enjoy them, but I have fought them. And I've lived to fight another day. So I've done okay. But it's nasty. It is unpleasant on a level that people are not prepared for. And everything I've seen about her suggests that she got into this naively and was stunned at the level of blowback. But again, I also think some of the blowback is probably related to the fact that people are pissed off. The other thing I would say that is maybe a more interesting meta narrative to what you're talking about here is what you and I kind of sloppily refer to it as like Twitter, but it's not actually Twitter. Is it the power of collective opinion within Canadian media or any other institution? What I'm wondering about, is it losing its power, or and it's not actually not even an or, maybe it's just a different way of phrasing it. Are these groups in society just decoupling from each other? Like rather than having,
I think that people have adapted to the power of these sorts of intense, nasty tribal Twitter cliques. I think that people, and like, we're perfect examples of this. We recognize that essentially the Twitter tribe, the Twitter cancel culture brigade, represented a material threat to our well-being, happiness, and professional prospects, and so we decoupled ourselves from it willingly. We adopted. That's why we went to the line. We were just like, we're not canceled. You can't. The dead do not die. You can't cancel us. Like, go ahead and try. Have fun. Hate on us to Twitter to your own degree. I'm going to be judged on the work that I produce, and you can't cancel us. So essentially, I think that to some extent, that a lot of what we're seeing is that for a while, it's the pendulum, the cancel culture brigade type people developed a disproportionate amount of influence over the public discourse and an incredible amount of ability to sort of decide what the Overton window was and who got to say legitimate and illegitimate things within that window. And then we've seen a backlash and a response to it. We've seen more and more people just say, fine, I'm opting out of your system and your tribe. Fine, I'm just deciding that I don't care. And people have toughened up and become a little bit more resilient, I think. So
I think what you're describing,
I think there's a nobody maintains these power structures indefinitely, right? So I think that there's been a sort of subtle but palpable shift. And to me, I'm just like, I think that part of the reason why people are so disproportionately angry at Tara and they hate her so much is she made herself a target. But also, it's just becoming really clear that, you know, you can write all the Gawker articles you want about her, you can rail against her on Twitter, and nobody cares. Nobody cares. You're talking to your own couple
your
hundred
own tribe,
and that's tribe.
This is what I think the term I would use to describe this, and it's kind of an ugly term, and I mean no offense to poke my fingers into any geopolitical wounds here. I think what we've seen, and we're seeing this for a lot of economic reasons in Canadian journalism, I would describe this as balkanization. Like we are seeing groups break off entirely from what we would have once upon a time considered the moderating mainstream of Canadian journalism, where it was not all that uncommon for a person to go from this place to the other, to the other, to the other, and kind of rinse and repeat for an entire career. I think we are seeing, and this is on the left, it's on the right, and I wish everybody good luck with this. Like, even if you're ideologically away from me, if you want to go independent on your own, God bless you. But I think we're seeing a balkanization. I think the moderating, and I would also say sort of ruling influence of the mainstream media has been reduced to the point where people on the right, people on the left, and also not even political niches, like cultural spaces. Like, I know The Athletic is a bad example because it just got bought up by the New York Times, but we're seeing some of the more niche functions of journalism just break free. And it's like, hey, look, you want nothing but music reviews? Here's your website. We've got 3 or 4 great culture writers, and it costs you $5 a month. Please support us. Movie reviews, TV reviews, music, literature, sports, very micro niche. I mean, here, Blacklocks in Ottawa, which does really micro specific reporting on parliamentary, often committee reports and things like that. We are seeing the media just disperse rather than being a big amorphous mob into a small thing, and that will limit the power of the Twitter.
I'll forward that. I'll take that thesis a little bit further, and I'll make the observation is that the sort of tanky Twitter left hated me most obviously and most vociferously when I was on Oppo, which was sort of a lefty run, sort of run by Candlein, which is considered kind of a lefty occupied territory.
The podcast.
Yeah, exactly. The second I stopped being an Oppo and I started to sort of do more stuff sort of the line, I started to do more stuff in MacLean's, the Twitter abuse I get has gone down by like 80%. It's only when I was actually in and exposed, I haven't produced any less, like I'm still as present as I've ever been. But like for me to go on CBC Calgary is a really positive, happy experience. But when I go on CBC Power and Politics, I get like hate for 3 days straight on Twitter. Like, you know what I mean? You become a figure and you have this target on your back when you cross enemy lines. That's what happens, even though I don't necessarily see any of these people as enemies. But like that seems to be the situation. You kind of have to be pushed into the opposite end. So it's when we notice that someone on the left has done something so crazy or egregious or whatever that person attracts the attention of the right. Then that person's going to get completely inundated in the same sort of thing. So like, I wonder if a lot of also the reason why the Tara Henley response has been so long lived is because it was an attack coming from within. Yep. Like I can write that same essay. Yeah, I can write that same essay, and everybody be like, I don't care. But the fact that it's coming from one of their own tribe, now she's a heretic. Now she must be cast out. And I mean, I think you get into real classic Puritan kind of dynamics on this one, right?
Oh no, like heretics have a rougher ride than infidels.
That's right. And I mean, that's true in almost all religious formats. An infidel is just someone who hasn't been saved. A heretic must be burned.
Oh, I mean, a lot of infidels get burned too, but I
Well,
take your point.
you understand my point.
Yep.
The point is somebody who, a former believer who changes their mind is a much bigger threat to the cohesiveness of the tribe
Oh,
than
look,
somebody
killing
who.
infidels is work. Killing heretics is personal.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, okay. So we'll come up with something about this. I will say to you though, to purely as an aside before we wrap this thing up, I have noticed the same thing as you. I have just sort of what I have noticed is not only are organized campaigns against people doing less damage, which is good, and it's good for a couple of reasons. I think institutions have smartened up a little bit, and this is something when we started the line a year and a half ago, we were very explicit. This actually was not going to be decided at the margins. It was going to be up to the moderating institutions in society to have some fucking pride and to basically go, I don't care how many people are hashtagging this. We have our internal process to review allegations, and if we clear someone, they're not fired. Fuck off.
Yeah.
And a year and a half ago, I don't think we were seeing much of that. I still think we could use more of that. I think it has gotten a bit better. I think, though, the balkanization is still happening and the tribes are just separating, and there's not as much zero-sum battles over particular jobs,
but also if you're so balkanized in your tribe on the left or the right, you've lost any ability to influence what happens in an institution on the other side. That's the flip side.
A couple of months
National
ago,
Post doesn't have to care about what a bunch of lefties on Twitter thinks anymore, and vice versa.
A couple of months ago, I got an email from a friend of mine. I'm not going to say friend. I'm going to say associate, who's someone who's very active on the political left. And he just said to me, hey, I'm sorry for the rough ride you're getting today. I don't think you deserve it. And I wrote back to him with total sincerity. I do not know what you're talking about. Like it had become so, and then he explained it to me, and I went, oh, okay. So like some people are mad at me, but no one told me directly. No one tweeted at me directly. No one communicated to my bosses. At least they never communicated anything on to me. It was like, apparently I was a bad guy on Twitter for a couple of days. And until someone reached out to me in solidarity, I did not know. And then like I kind of we laughed about it. Or he said to me, wow, I feel like an asshole now. Like I could have just said nothing and you would have gone without. I do, like a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, that would not have been the case.
No way. I mean, the other thing too that I've noticed is, and this is sort of like the ongoing occasional campaigns against me on Twitter, it's the same people, right? So I mean, you just wind up muting a couple hundred people, and I don't really know when there's a pile-on anymore, and I don't care. Like I'm not on Twitter really very much anymore. I don't give a shit. So
if we did not derive a significant percentage of our revenue from conversions from Twitter, we would not be on.
I'd be gone. Yeah, that's exactly right. And I don't. It's just not there anymore. Like the power that it probably had over me even 6 to 9 months ago, it's not there anymore. Like I now see the whole thing is so performative and so bullshit that I don't see it as a place for any kind of rational engagement. It's just
many of them, Jen, though, and this we have to be careful not to fall into the same trap of the line. So much of it's just fundraising.
Oh yeah.
Hey,
yeah,
Jen Gerson is a loser. She said a bad thing. Subscribe today because we give you the real news.
Today, yeah, exactly.
So it's okay. You know what? That's fine. And we get the line.
I think you said it best a couple of months ago, and that is like, look, all of Twitter is either mental health or public relations
or Star Trek tweets. Or Leaf
That's
tweets.
A mental health issue. Let's be honest.
Yeah, possibly. The Leafs, certainly. All right, so let's break this up. I will write food and psychology of Omicron. We won't write anything about the Queen. Should I also do the mild thing? Like those will be my 3 blurbs.
Yeah, you do the mild. I'll do something on Henley that doesn't actually talk about Henley because I don't have anything else to say about Henley. And also bluntly, I don't know. Is Henley gonna go crazy far right? I don't.
Possibly.
I'm not. Possibly, I don't know, and I don't really want
the whole thing. I mean, God bless her, but the whole thing has Lindsay Shepherd vibes to me, and God bless you too, Lindsay Shepherd.
She's on her own thing. We're not affiliated with her. That's fine. But so I don't want to focus too much time on Henley. I just think that the fact that Henley discourse is still ongoing is like a little bit like, why do you like? What's
So why
going
don't
on?
you do why don't you do the Henley and the balkanization stuff we're talking about here? Because I think that actually is interesting.
Yeah,
Why don't
Henley,
you do hospitals?
balkanization. Yeah,
I will do
I'll just do a
mild.
little thing on hospitals. A little thing on hospitals.
Okay, then I'll write the main blurbs then. Can you do the sinew of the post? You'll do the roundup, the intro. What do you
Yeah.
want to do for Dispatch Light?
Let's see how it pans out. I think I always sort of it always seems obvious to me what to do with the light on. Once everything's written, and we'll just do the one we're most comfortable with. I think I suspect it'll probably be something Omicron-y.
Yeah. Also, I should mention we do have from one of our other contributors something coming in on the Quebec vaccine passport.
Okay.
We wanted to leave that to someone with a better local view.
And his stuff is always really good, so it might be his.
Okay.
That we do the light on. Okay.
Okay. Well, that's all I have.
Talk soon.
All right. See you, everybody. Thanks for watching this video.
Bye.
Should we pull some of this out and make it a podcast? Because we talked about experimenting with
Oh
it.
yeah, totally. If we can do that, that'd be great. Let's totally do that if we can do it.
I don't know if it's technically complicated or not. I will find out.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, everybody.